in the heart of the Niger Delta, where the rivers run deep and the forest never sleeps. A boy was born with nothing. No name that history would remember. No family to protect him. No future that anyone could see. He was just a child. One of millions forgotten by the world. But this child was different. Because that forgotten boy would one day sit on a throne, command an empire, control the most valuable trade route in West Africa, and make the most powerful empire on earth. Think twice before crossing him. When the British came, they came with warships. They came with weapons. They came with the full force of the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. They expected submission. They expected fear. They expected him to bow. They did not know Jaja of Opobo. This is his story. And once you hear it, you will never forget it. To understand the story of Jaja of Opobo, you first need to understand the world he was born into. A world of rivers. A world of forests. A world of ancient traditions and powerful kingdoms. The Niger Delta. If you have ever stood at the edge of the Niger Delta, you already know it is unlike anywhere else on earth. The rivers do not just flow here. They breathe. They twist and turn through dense tropical forest, creating a labyrinth of waterways so complex that even today, with modern technology, parts of the delta remain unexplored. In the 19th century, this vast network of rivers was not just a geographical feature. It was the backbone of one of the most important trading regions in all of West Africa. Everything moved through these rivers. Palm oil, ivory, cloth, slaves. The Niger Delta was the gateway between the African interior and the outside world. And whoever controlled the rivers, controlled the trade, controlled the wealth, controlled the power. Now let us talk about the people who called this place home. The Ijaw people. One of the oldest and most fascinating civilizations in Nigerian history. The Ijaw had been living in the Niger Delta for thousands of years. Long before the arrival of any European trader. Long before anyone from the outside world even knew this place existed. They had developed sophisticated systems of governance, powerful trading networks, and a deep spiritual connection to the rivers that sustained them. Their canoes moved through the delta waterways with extraordinary skill, trading with kingdoms deep in the interior, exchanging goods that traveled hundreds of kilometers along these ancient river routes. The Ijaw were not just fishermen. They were traders, diplomats, warriors, and the undisputed masters of the Niger Delta waterways. But there was another group of people in the delta who would play a critical role in our story. The Anna Pepple House. One of the most powerful trading houses in the city of Bonny. Now Bonny was not just any city. Bonny was the heart of trade in the Niger Delta. Ships from Britain, Portugal, and other European nations came to Bonny. They came to buy palm oil, the most valuable commodity in West Africa at the time. Palm oil was not just cooking oil. In the 19th century, palm oil was industrial gold. It was used to lubricate the machines of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. It was used to make soap and candles. It was so valuable that the trade route between Britain and the Niger Delta was nicknamed the Oil Rivers. And right at the center of all this wealth and trade sat the city of Bonny. And the Anna Pepple House was one of its most powerful trading dynasties. This is where our story truly begins. Around 1821, in a small Igbo village far from the rivers of the Delta, a boy was born. We do not know his birth name. History did not think it was important enough to record. He was Igbo, born into a community that had existed for centuries in the forests of what is today southeastern Nigeria. But his life in that village would be brief and brutally interrupted, because sometime in his early childhood, this boy was captured. Torn from everything he knew, from his family, from his community, from the only world he had ever understood, and sold into slavery. Now let us pause here for a moment, because it is important to understand what slavery meant in this context. In 19th century West Africa, slavery was not a single simple thing. There were different forms of it, different levels, different experiences. Some enslaved people worked in fields under brutal conditions. Others became domestic servants. And some, in the trading houses of the Niger Delta, were given opportunities that slaves in other parts of the world could never have imagined. Not because slavery was ever acceptable or kind, but because the trading houses of Bonny needed intelligent and capable people to help them manage their complex trading operations. And sometimes, a slave with exceptional ability could rise. Not easily, not without suffering, but rise nonetheless. This young Igbo boy arrived in Bonny as a slave. He was purchased by the Unearthed house, one of the most powerful trading dynasties in the city. He was given a new name, Jaja, and his life in the trading house began. From the very beginning, the people around Jaja noticed something about him, something that set him apart from everyone else. He was extraordinarily intelligent, not just smart in the ordinary sense, but possessed of a kind of intelligence that goes beyond book learning or formal education. He understood people. He understood trade. He understood power. And most importantly, he understood how to navigate a world that was designed to keep him at the bottom. The leaders of the Unearthed house recognized this, and instead of wasting his abilities on menial labor, they began giving him more responsibility, more access, more opportunity to learn the intricacies of the palm oil trade. Jaja learned everything: how to negotiate with traders from the interior, how to manage the complex credit systems that kept the trading houses running, how to deal with the European merchants who came to buy their palm oil, how to read a situation and turn it to his advantage. He was not just learning a trade. He was studying power. And he was a very fast learner. As the years passed, Jaja's reputation within the Unearthed house grew. He was no longer just a slave with ability. He had become one of the most important figures in the entire trading house. His skill at negotiation was legendary. His understanding of the palm oil trade was unmatched. And his ability to inspire loyalty in the people around him was something that even the most powerful chiefs in Bonny had to respect. By the time Jaja reached adulthood, he had risen to a position of significant authority within the Unearthed house. A remarkable achievement for anyone. An almost unimaginable achievement for a man who had arrived in Bonny as a slave with no name. But Jaja's story was only just beginning, because the Unearthed house was about to face a crisis. And in that crisis, Jaja would find his moment. The city of Bonny in the mid-19th century was a place of intense political competition. The trading houses were not just commercial enterprises. They were political powers. They competed fiercely with each other for control of trade routes, for access to European merchants, for dominance over the rivers that connected Bonny to the interior. And within this competitive environment, the Unearthed house was struggling. Internal conflicts had weakened it. Leadership disputes had divided it. And rival trading houses were taking advantage of its weakness. The Unearthed house needed strong leadership. It needed someone who could unite its factions, restore its trading dominance, and navigate the complex political landscape of Bonny. It needed Jaja. And so in 1863, something happened that would have been unthinkable just a few decades earlier. Jaja, the Igbo boy who had arrived in Bonny as a nameless slave, was elected as the head of the Unearthed house, the most powerful position in one of Bonny's most powerful trading dynasties. Let that sink in for a moment. From slave to leader of a trading empire. In one lifetime. Through nothing but intelligence, determination, and an extraordinary ability to understand people and power. Under Jaja's leadership, the Unearthed house was transformed. He restructured its trading operations. He rebuilt its relationships with suppliers in the interior. He negotiated better terms with European merchants. And he restored the trading house to a position of dominance in Bonny. But Jaja was not satisfied with simply restoring what had been lost. He had bigger ambitions. Much bigger. By the late 1860s, Jaja had made the Unearthed house the most powerful trading operation in Bonny. But political tensions in the city were rising. Rivalry between the trading houses had become increasingly bitter. And Jaja, ever the strategist, could see that the situation in Bonny was becoming unsustainable. He began to think about something bolder. Something that no one in his position had ever attempted before. What if he did not just lead a trading house? What if he built his own kingdom? In 1869, Jaja made one of the most audacious decisions in Nigerian history. He left Bonny, taking with him a significant number of loyal followers, trading associates, and crucially, control of some of the most important palm oil supply routes from the interior. He moved to a new location further along the coast, a place called Opobo. And there, He founded a new city, a new kingdom. His kingdom. The Kingdom of Opobo. Now this was not just a geographical move. This was a masterstroke of strategic genius. Because Jaja had chosen his location very carefully. Opobo sat at the mouth of the Imo River, one of the most important waterways connecting the interior of the Niger Delta to the coast. By controlling Opobo, Jaja controlled access to the interior trade routes. Any merchant who wanted to buy palm oil from the interior had to go through Jaja. Any European trading company that wanted access to the rich palm oil producing regions inland had to negotiate with Jaja. He had not just founded a city. He had positioned himself as the indispensable middleman between the interior of West Africa and the entire outside world. The Kingdom of Opobo grew with extraordinary speed. Traders and communities that had previously dealt with Boni now found it more advantageous to deal with Jaja. He offered fair terms. He was reliable. He honored his agreements. And he had an almost supernatural ability to make people trust him. Within just a few years of its founding, Opobo had become one of the most important trading centers in the entire Niger Delta. And Jaja was its undisputed king. He was recognized formally as King of Opobo, not just by his own people, but by the British government itself. In 1873, the British signed a treaty with Jaja, recognizing the Kingdom of Opobo as a sovereign entity, recognizing Jaja as its legitimate ruler, and agreeing to respect the trading arrangements he had established. The boy who had arrived in Boni with no name was now a king, recognized by the most powerful empire on earth. To understand how powerful Jaja had become, you need to understand just how valuable palm oil was in the 19th century. We mentioned earlier that palm oil was industrial gold. But let us put some numbers to that. By the 1870s and 1880s, the Niger Delta was exporting hundreds of thousands of tons of palm oil every year. To Britain alone. This palm oil kept the machines of British industry running. It made the soap that British families used every day. It lit the candles in British homes. It was absolutely essential to the British economy. And Jaja controlled a significant portion of it. His trading operation was sophisticated beyond anything that most people associate with 19th century Africa. He had a network of trading relationships stretching deep into the interior, covering communities across what is today southeastern Nigeria. He employed agents who traveled these routes, collecting palm oil from producers, bringing it back to Opobo, where it was stored, graded, and prepared for sale to European merchants. He maintained detailed records of his trading operations. He understood credit and finance in ways that impressed even experienced European merchants. And he drove hard bargains, always ensuring that Opobo got the best possible price for its palm oil. But Jaja did something else that was truly remarkable. Something that set him apart from almost every other African ruler of his era. He cut out the middlemen. European trading companies had long profited from buying palm oil cheaply from African traders and selling it at enormous markup in Europe. Jaja decided to change this arrangement. He began establishing direct relationships with buyers in Britain, bypassing the trading companies entirely, selling his palm oil directly to British manufacturers, at prices that reflected its true value. This was not just good business. This was revolutionary. No African ruler had ever attempted anything like it before, and it made Jaja extraordinarily wealthy. But it also made him some very powerful enemies. By the 1880s, the relationship between Jaja and the British had become complicated. On one hand, the British respected him. They had signed treaties with him. They dealt with him as a legitimate sovereign ruler. Senior British officials corresponded with him regularly, and visiting British merchants spoke of him with a mixture of admiration and frustration. Admiration for his intelligence and business acumen. Frustration because he was simply too good at protecting his own interests. The British trading companies that operated in the Niger Delta were growing increasingly unhappy with Jaja. His control of the interior trade routes meant they could not bypass him. His direct relationships with British manufacturers meant they could not profit from marking up his palm oil. And his insistence on fair prices meant they could not exploit the trade the way they wanted to. They began lobbying the British government, putting pressure on British officials in the region, arguing that Jaja was an obstacle to British commercial interests, that his control of trade routes was damaging British business, that something needed to be done. The British government was in a difficult position. They had signed a treaty with Jaja. They had recognized his sovereignty. But the commercial pressure from trading companies was intense. And Britain's broader imperial ambitions in West Africa were growing. The scramble for Africa. That period in the late 19th century when European powers rushed to carve up the African continent between themselves, was accelerating. And the Niger Delta, with its incredibly valuable palm oil trade, was exactly the kind of territory that Britain wanted to control completely. Jaja stood in the way of that. In 1887, a new British consul arrived in the Niger Delta. His name was Harry Johnston. And he had very clear instructions from the British government. Deal with the Jaja problem. Johnston was a skilled diplomat. But he was also a man who understood that behind British diplomacy stood British military power. He began putting pressure on Jaja, demanding that he open his trade routes to free trade, meaning that European trading companies should be allowed to bypass Opobo entirely and trade directly with communities in the interior. This would have completely destroyed everything Jaja had built. His entire economic model depended on controlling those routes. Jaja refused. Firmly. Diplomatically. But absolutely. Johnston tried a different approach. He invited Jaja to a meeting. To discuss the trade situation. To find a resolution. He sent Jaja a letter guaranteeing his safety, promising that the meeting would be conducted in good faith. That Jaja would be free to leave at any time. Jaja was suspicious. He knew what British promises could sometimes be worth. But he also believed that as a sovereign ruler, who had signed treaties with Britain, he had rights that even the British government was obligated to respect. He accepted the invitation and travelled to meet Johnston on a British ship. What happened next is one of the most controversial moments in Nigerian history. When Jaja arrived on the British ship, he was not greeted as a sovereign ruler coming to negotiate. He was arrested, taken prisoner, in direct violation of the promise of safe conduct that Johnston had given him. Jaja protested. He argued that this was a betrayal, a violation of the treaties Britain had signed with him, a violation of the promise Johnston had personally made. Johnston acknowledged that the promise of safe conduct had indeed been given, but he proceeded with the arrest anyway. Jaja was put on a ship and taken away from Opobo, away from his kingdom, away from everything he had built, to stand trial before a British consular court. The trial was held in Accra in what is today Ghana. Jaja was charged with blocking free trade and with actions against British interests. He defended himself with remarkable dignity and intelligence, arguing that as a sovereign ruler, he had every right to control trade within his own territory, that he had done nothing that violated the treaties he had signed with Britain, that the real issue was simply that he had been too successful and too independent for British commercial interests to tolerate. He was found guilty and sentenced to deportation. Jaja of Opobo, the boy who had risen from slavery to build a kingdom, was sent into exile to the West Indies, thousands of kilometers from the Niger Delta, thousands of kilometers from his people, thousands of kilometers from everything he had spent his life building. Jaja spent years in exile, in St. Vincent in the Caribbean, far from home, far from his kingdom, far from the rivers of the Niger Delta that had shaped his entire life. But even in exile, Jaja never stopped fighting. He wrote letters to British officials, to anyone who would listen, arguing for his right to return, arguing that he had been treated unjustly, arguing that the promises made to him had been broken. And slowly, the British government began to feel the pressure. His case attracted attention. People in Britain itself began to question whether Jaja had been treated fairly, whether the promises made to him had been honoured, whether justice had been served. In 1891, the British government agreed to allow Jaja to return home. He boarded a ship, heading back to West Africa, heading back to the Niger Delta, heading back to his people. But Jaja of Opobo never made it home. He died on the journey. In 1891, somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean, between his exile and his homeland. The exact circumstances of his death remain unclear to this day. He was approximately 70 years old. The news of his death reached Opobo, and the grief was profound, because Jaja was not just a king to the people of Opobo. He was their founder, their protector, The man who had taken a collection of traders and fishermen and built them into a kingdom. The man who had stood up to the most powerful empire on earth and made them negotiate. The man who had shown what was possible when intelligence, determination, and an unbreakable spirit were combined with an extraordinary understanding of the world. What Jaja left behind. The kingdom of Opobo outlasted Jaja. The city he founded still exists today. Opobo town in Rivers State, Nigeria. Still there. Still carrying his name. Still honoring his memory. The people of Opobo still celebrate Jaja as their greatest ancestor. As the man who built something from nothing. As the man who refused to accept the limits that the world tried to place on him. His story is studied in Nigerian schools. His portrait hangs in government buildings. And in 2000, the Central Bank of Nigeria honored Jaja of Opobo by featuring him on the Nigerian 5 naira note, the former slave, on the currency of a nation. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Jaja's legacy is what his story says about the human spirit. About what is possible when a person refuses to accept the circumstances they were born into. About what intelligence and determination can achieve, even in the most hostile and unjust of environments. Jaja did not just build a kingdom. He built a proof. A proof that greatness is not determined by where you start. It is determined by the choices you make, the people you inspire, and the legacy you leave behind. And that is the story of Jaja of Opobo. The boy with no name, who became a king, who built an empire from nothing, who stood up to the most powerful force in the world, with nothing but his intelligence, his dignity, and his unbreakable will. His rivers are still here. His city is still here. His story is still here. And now, so are you. Having heard it. Having felt it. Knowing something today that you did not know yesterday. That is what Africa Unearthed is here for. Every Friday, we will bring you a story like this one. A story that has been waiting to be told. A story that deserves to be heard. A story that reminds us all of the extraordinary depth and richness of African history. Next week, we travel to a kingdom so ancient, so sophisticated, so remarkably preserved, that archaeologists who first discovered it could barely believe what they were seeing. A civilization that existed in Nigeria over 2,500 years ago. Subscribe to Africa Unearthed so you do not miss that story. Because trust us, it is one you will want to hear. This is Africa Unearthed.